AFP is still a young organization. You know, we're not the Red Cross. We're not any of these other big organizations that have been around for decades or centuries even. We're a young group, but I think that we have learned a lot of lessons in how to communicate effectively with legislators on both sides. Can you tell us a little bit about what sort of impact we've had in the last couple of years?
Absolutely, and I've got, I think, the perfect story, and I suspect you know what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to tell you something. I don't like to use I words. I like to use we words. But I'm going to use an I word, and I'm going to say I was able to do something because of AFP. Without AFP, I would not have been able to do this. There was one guy that stood up in the Education Appropriations Committee against a specific tax. There was one guy that stood up on the floor of the House of Representatives as a Republican against a specific tax during the budget debate. There was one guy that stood up on the floor of the House of Representatives about a specific tax increase during the tax cut debate. There was one guy that stood up on the floor of the House of Representatives during the Reform Enterprise Florida Foundation debate that would have elicited the $250 million that the governor recommended. There was one guy that stood up against that on the floor. You probably figured out I was the only guy that stood up all 4 times. Now let me tell you what the bill was. And I could not have done that if I didn't have AFP telling everybody, Fred's right. He's right, he gets it. And let me tell you why I understood it. I was a mayor for 8 years. It helps to have been a mayor in local government to understand state government and when state encroaches on local. I believe it helps at the federal government to have somebody with state experience to know when the federal government is encroaching on the state. Here's what we did. Governor Scott got some bad advice. By the way, I'm all in for Donald Trump. Give my hand, come on. I'm all in for Rick Scott. But I stood up against my own kind because he was wrong. Governor Rick Scott was told that if the property values go up and you don't lower the rate to compensate, it's not a tax increase, it's just capturing the increased economic activity. That's wrong. That came out August 26th. The Florida Board of Education adopted Rick Scott's proposed budget, which included a $428 million tax increase for all of Florida in your required local effort school property tax that Tallahassee levies, dictates, and mandates. The local school board has zero impact on the required local effort. So August 26th, that came out. August 28th, I wrote a letter to the governor, Speaker of the House, President of the Senate, the whole shooting match, and I said that's either ignorance or hypocrisy. Ignorance, you don't know the law, or hypocrisy, you're saying the state tells the locals they have to roll back the rate or it's a tax increase, but you're saying you don't want to do that for the state. So in case it's ignorance, I'm going to teach you. If the values go up and you don't roll back the rate and you take in more revenue, that's a tax increase. So throughout the whole of the last session, we talked about $1 billion tax cut. When I got up on the floor, I said I vote for the $1 billion tax cut, but you should call it a $500 million tax cut because you're raising $428 million at home. When I talked about the Enterprise Florida, I said you might not like this one, I said I might be able to support some incentives that are targeted, that are with clawbacks, that you have to get the investment back on at least a 3-to-1 basis within 3 years, blah, blah, blah. But I said I absolutely will never support incentives when you're raising property tax on all of our taxpayers at home to give money to somebody else's corporate welfare to come and compete with our current businesses. So when I talked about this bill, the final day of session, we, quote, only passed a $150 billion tax cut, and we avoided the $428 million tax increase, and we funded that education from Tallahassee where it should have been funded, and it's only because of AFP educating all the other legislators. Fred's right, it is a tax, because they were telling me, no, it's not a tax increase. I said, oh, yes, it is.